In April 2015, I was lucky enough to be able to take a trip with a whole lot of students of mine to Nepal, and we got to go and hike the Himalayas. Now, lifelong dream for me, so it was really, really exciting. And myself, another teacher, some expedition leaders, and 18 girls, we headed off, spent a day in Kathmandu, went and did some project work off to the east of Kathmandu, so close to the Everest side. And then after that, we headed across to Pokhara, and we went and hiked to Poon Hill, which is part of the Annapurna circuit, which was really, really exciting. It was everything that I imagined it would be. There were prayer flags everywhere. There was, loads of hikers, and the actual walking there was beautiful. I mean, it was steep, and my Sherpa and I, we had a I don't do hills, and I would go, "God, when is it flat? How much further till it's flat?" And you go, just over there. And I'm like, "Is that real flat or Nepalese flat?" Nepalese flat. I'm like, "That's not real flat. Don't lie to me." I never lie. So that was kind of a daily interaction, which was hilarious. But it was something out of a Lord of the Rings film or book. It was these beautiful winding paths. You'd walk on. The stairs were sometimes just roots, and the roots of the trees would make up the stairs that you would be walking up or down. So that was amazing, and we summited Poon Hill in time for sunrise, and we got to see the sun rising over the Annapurna mountains. And I think it was the second day, I'll never forget seeing my first glimpse of one of those mountains from a distance as we were walking up a really, really, really steep side of a hill that morning. But it was really, really exciting, something I wanted to do my whole life, and we were there and we did it. And so we went up Poon Hill, and then we were heading back, so Gorapani, Poon Hill, and then we started walking off. We went to Tadapani, and then we ended up going to Gandruk. Now at Gandruk, we were there on the 25th of April, and that's when things got really interesting. But when I say interesting, I mean we didn't know what was happening at first, but it really was a day for the history books. So let's have a look at how earthquakes are formed. So on this diagram we're going to see the focus. That is where the earthquake actually happens, under the ground. The epicenter is what we know from above the focus. So what we got going out is our P waves, and those get followed by the S waves. And we'll have a look at how those waves happen and what the difference is. But these are quite cool because the P waves are actually the reason that we know that the outer core of the Earth is made out of liquid and it isn't solid. So that's really quite interesting. So looking at P waves are called that because they are primary waves. And so these are the first waves that will come off of the focus. And it's a little bit like an accordion. So if you imagine an accordion opening and then closing, that's how these waves are moving. So they're not moving up and down, they are moving straight out, and they kind of concertina in and out rather than waving. So these move really fast. These are moving through granite. They'll move at about 5 kilometers per second. So these happen really quick, and they are much smaller than the waves that will follow afterwards. And these waves that follow straight afterwards are the secondary waves, so they are the S waves, meaning they follow directly after the primary waves. They are traveling at about half the speed of our primary waves, and this is generally where we actually get a little bit of warning. So the P waves will be recognized first, and then the S waves will come in and cause all the big damage. So as these waves move out from the focus, they're actually going to start causing a ripple effect. And imagine if you were shaking out a blanket. So it's got more of a wave to it, and this is what comes in and causes your structural damage. So the waves that travel along the surface of the earth are our L waves. Our S waves are the when they're still in the ground, so they're rippling under the ground but not causing breaks in the rock below the surface. The L waves on the surface are what cause our damage to infrastructure, etc. And we can see on a seismograph how these P and S waves are going to look. So first we'll see the P waves, and they're quite small, and after that the S waves will follow and create a lot of damage. So you can see them quite clearly, P waves and S waves, and in between there's this little bit of a gap. So depending on how far away your focus is from settlements, you can actually put a couple of seconds warning out, which they do in some countries, such as Japan, which has a very sophisticated early warning system. Now, the impacts of these earthquakes are obviously devastating, and the magnitude measured on the Richter scale can vary. So you'll have earthquakes that are like a 3.5, that will barely wobble a glass on a table. And I know that because there was one in Turkey that wobbled the glass and everyone else thought I was crazy, but there was a 3.5 magnitude 10 kilometers off the coastline. But when you start hitting your bigger magnitude, so 7.5 was originally the Nepalese earthquake's given rating on the Richter scale, but later it was upgraded to 7.8, which is fairly significant. So we know that a Richter scale is exponential in its rating, and I'm going to just show you here. This was Nepal at the time of the 7.5 magnitude earthquake. At that time, the yellow star is where the epicenter was, with the focus beneath it. The blue star is where we were hiking outside at Gandruk, exactly when that happened. And the red star is Kathmandu, the capital city, which saw the greatest impact as the S waves moved out from that focus. The majority of the S waves were directed, so the most of the force went in the direction of Kathmandu. So I think what it came down to was we were really, really lucky that the majority of the L waves and the damage from those S waves went in the opposite direction to where we were walking at that time. So very fortunate, and I think around 9,000 people died that day. So we were incredibly lucky to not be hurt or injured when that all happened. So as a geography teacher, I was like, oh my goodness, what is going on? This is amazing. But the reality is that it was an absolutely devastating event, and I think my academic and my moral compasses were pulling in opposite directions. But definitely once in a lifetime experience, and lucky to be able to tell the tale. So I'm standing on the path, and the earthquake started like very kind of gently at first, and I think that was the P waves. But because we were so close to that focus, they kind of became one, so we really weren't that far away. So it was seconds, so it went from little shakes up to those S wave, L wave shakes, like really, really quickly. And the first kind of 10 seconds, you're just kind of standing there going, okay, this is a tremor. We have these in South Africa sometimes, like, that's okay. So we had a little bit of a tremor, and then it just kept going. And 55 seconds is a really, really long time. So just like pause for a moment and stare at the clock in absolute silence for 50 seconds or 55 seconds. And yeah, really, really long time. So the first couple of seconds was fine. And then I'm like, there's a 3-story hotel above me, and people are running out and screaming, and there's like a drop down to this cabbage patch below me, and I'm on the path, and there's a dog wondering why we're not feeding him, and Gun's just standing there, and I'm like, what do we do? And he's just, so I was like, okay, it's been good. There's nothing you can do. It's like standing on jelly. The whole ground was just wobbling, and you can't move anywhere. You can't run. You can't do anything. And from what I understand, if you were even closer to the epicenter, there were descriptions of people in those areas really, really close, who just, the ground did this underneath them. And I think that's a pretty good description, of what the ground actually felt like. The aftershocks were also pretty intense. probably about an hour later, there was a 6 point something magnitude aftershock. We were having lunch at that point, which was all very weird. You know, it was a big aftershock, but one of my students was carrying her soup bowl and running out to the field so that we weren't, it was a single story, so it was fairly safe. But yeah, it was weird, those aftershocks that kind of came through. So after we left lunch, and we were walking down from Gandruk, we were heading down, we were supposed to cross over this big bridge to Landruk, which, when I say big bridge, it's a little metal one, but it carries over a huge valley. And we really weren't sure what was going on. We hadn't received any communication. We were in a valley, so our sat phone wasn't connecting. So we were just kind of holding the line and waiting to see what happened. And so we're walking down, and gradually the Sherpas, a couple of them, started getting messages on their cell phones, and it was, you know, there's a lot of damage in Kathmandu. Darba Square, the tower fell. 500 people died in that tower. And you could see the people who are actually from Nepal gradually getting all of this news, and it was just devastating to see, to be there, and kind of, there's nothing you can do. As we walked through the villages, it was quite interesting for me to see social networking in practice, and I'm not even kidding. It was, you know, the Sherpa got a message, and we would walk past a little house, and the woman was listening to the radio, and she would give him some news, she would give her some news, and on we would go, and then we'd meet someone else who was tearing his house down because it had a fissure in the side and he wouldn't be able to stay in it, so he was literally pulling down his house because there were cracks formed by that earthquake. And they would exchange news, and you just saw this web of information in an area where there aren't roads, there are paths and donkeys, and that's literally all you have to get around there. So information spread pretty fast considering the kind of minimal technology in that particular area. So our route was diverted. After we managed to get through the ops room, they said, trip's over. Everything else you were going to do, we were going to go down to Chitwan and see tigers and rhinos and things, and they're like, nope, that's it, done. So our hiking route changed. We no longer went to Landruk, we just went straight down into the valley so we could hike out, because there was no way to pick us up with a car or anything. And we went for that route, and you could start seeing little bits of damage. So there's a picture of a boulder, and if you see the other picture, you can see where the boulder came from, and it had shot across the road that we were walking on. So you could see little things like that, but obviously with most of the shock waves going down Kathmandu way, they were fairly superficial damages. Only a few houses that we noticed had these big cracks, and the family standing outside just staring at them going, now what? So we took our exit route, and we managed to get out of the mountains safely, and then we were set into evacuation mode. So what evacuation mode means is you stay put until the ops room tells you where to go. So we ended up getting onto a bus of some sort, driving to a field outside of Pokhara and staying there for 2 days. We weren't allowed back into the town because we didn't know what the infrastructure was going to be like, whether there was any damage. We managed to get our expedition leader, he got a motorbike and went and fetched all of our stuff, because for the hike we'd just literally taken our hiking clothes, our sleeping clothes, and that's it. So anything else that we had clothes wise, anything we'd bought, that was all locked up at a hotel in Pokhara somewhere. So we managed to get all of that stuff to us, and we sat on a field for 2 days, and it was beautiful. We had lovely views. We were fed, which was really fortunate. We had an amazing company that we went with, and I will put their name in the information below because I can't remember what their names were. But they stuck with us right till the end, which was really, really awesome. So yeah, after a while we had to leave that tent because we needed to get to Kathmandu. So to get out of the country, they opened the airport at Kathmandu for 4 days, and our flight happened to be scheduled within those 4 days, which was really, really lucky. So we had to get to Kathmandu while everyone was getting out of Kathmandu. So we ended up with my team, my colleagues' team, and a group from New Zealand, I think. The three teams landed up in 3 buses and we headed into Kathmandu. And it's like one of those apocalypse movies where everyone else is leaving the city and then you have that one little idiot car that's driving into the city, and we were that idiot car, just 3 buses worth. But it was really scary, actually, just getting to Kathmandu, because the road between Kathmandu and Pokhara is really narrow. And on sheer cliffs, and I mean sheer cliff above and sheer cliff down to the valley below. And the people leaving Kathmandu who were on the safer side of the cliff, they had formed 2 lanes to try and get out of the city. So we were like edging along this tiny little lane with a sheer drop below us. My nerves were shot. But as we started getting closer to Kathmandu, that's where you really started seeing the damage. So when we crossed the halfway mark between Pokhara and Kathmandu, that was around where the epicenter was. And Kathmandu, you started seeing more damage as you got closer to the city. When we arrived in Kathmandu, it was dark, and I say that I'm grateful for that because I had a group of children in my care and I didn't want them to see any of that kind of damage and devastation. And not because I didn't want them to see it, but I needed to try and protect them as much as I could. So when we drove into the city, what I noticed though was some military people. I think the Swiss were already there. This was probably about 4 days after the quake, so there were military groups around carrying people. You could see people in the lobbies of hospitals, the lights were on there, and I could almost see silhouettes of these tilted buildings that look almost dominoing into each other. So you could kind of see what was going on, but not really up close, which, you know, was a good thing in my position. But the knock-on effect of this earthquake is, you know, it's beyond just the infrastructure damage. So in our instance, Kathmandu particularly, if you don't finish building a building, you don't pay tax on it. So a lot of the buildings in Kathmandu are incomplete because of that loophole. And so a lot of the buildings had these metal wires sticking out of the top, but it also made them less structurally sound. So we had you know, buildings being damaged because they weren't complete. And the other things that happen with earthquakes in general is you'll have things like your water and sewage pipes that are under the ground get shifted around, they break underground, and you end up having contaminated drinking water. I know Kathmandu lost running water for days and days and weeks. The entire time that we were there was no running water at all. We had to have bottled water if we needed something to drink, and that was it. So your infrastructure gets damaged that way, your physical buildings break down, and obviously the loss of life was devastating. So we were in Kathmandu for 2 days waiting for our designated flight date. We knew that our airline was bringing in extra planes to try and get people out, so we were, you know, hopefully this is going to happen. We could hear helicopters overhead the whole time. There were people going up and down. We were in this tiny little compound area, but you could hear sirens and cars driving up and down, trucks driving up and down. Yeah, and we just kind of held position until we could get out. When we drove to the airport, Gun, that Sherpa from earlier, he actually he'd fetched his motorbike at some point, and he went and drove with us. So he kind of drove in convoy. We organized for our route to go around the city as much as possible rather than through the city, because again, damages and danger of buildings falling. And what for me was the most sobering sight was all of the funeral pyres. So you could see these little tendrils of smoke from all the pyres along the river of the cremation ceremonies that were happening in the city. So that was pretty hectic. And then we got to the airport. We didn't know what was going to wait for us there. We didn't know if there were going to be loads of people, if it was going to be chaos. So we got there. like 5 hours early, and a representative from the airline came up and was like, hey, which flight are you on? And we're like, we are on the one at like 3. And he's like, cool, come with me now, we're getting you on the 12 o'clock flight. And that was great. So we left earlier than we expected. So we flew out and we got to Qatar, and we were greeted by the ambassador to Qatar from South Africa, and he and his entourage came and met us, and he phoned up my old boss and we chatted briefly on the phone, just saying there are going to be a lot of cameras and things when you get back. You know, the press is going to meet us at the airport, and I was like, okay, that's the thing. So yeah, that was an interesting moment, because, you know, we were okay. We were very fortunate. We weren't hurt. So we had an opportunity, and the girls really took that opportunity, and they turned it around, and they, you know, said, let's help Nepal, because they really are in a bad place right now. And the girls left their tents, they left their sleeping bags, and I left my rain jacket. Like, whatever you had that you didn't need to take home with you was left for the people in Nepal, just to help them, because we didn't know when they were going to get the help that they needed. It is a less economically developed country, so they don't have the kind of mechanisms in place to recover from one of these incidents really quickly. So yeah, when we got back, lots of chaos at the airport, reporters and parents and signs and all sorts. But it was good to be home, and definitely an experience that is worth retelling, but definitely not worth reliving. And a little shout out to World Challenge, who was amazing. Thanks guys for getting us through that. They organised all of it, so we were safe and we were fed and we were all okay. So big shout out to those guys. And you know, the school I was working at the time, and the girls were just incredible, so shout out to them as well. So that's the story of the Nepal earthquake, from a teacher's perspective, I guess. It was a good learning curve, interesting experience, something I've definitely studied, read through in books, had lectures on at varsity. So it was an interesting experience to live through it. I hope that you learned something about earthquakes from this. If you have any questions, write them below. Like, share, subscribe, and see you for the next one.